was 12 when I realized that the love of my life was movies. It's a formative age, and I had just seen Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time. The first of 14 times in the theater. And coming out of that movie, I realized I wanted to be Steven Spielberg. I wanted to be George Lucas. I wanted to be everything that movie was to me for everybody else in the nerd world I lived in for the rest of my life. But where I lived and where I grew up was the Quad Cities. Anybody from the Quad Cities here tonight? All right, a little representation, thank you. It is not the Twin Cities, it's the Quad Cities. Yeah, 2 cities on the Illinois side of the Mississippi, 2 on the Iowa side of the Mississippi, central Illinois, central Iowa. It's a very rural area, farm country, and you had 3 options for careers where I grew up. Option 1, you could be a farmer. Very noble profession. My whole family, farm stock, wonderful career. Option 2, you could work for John Deere. I grew up 10 miles from John Deere World Headquarters. Yeah, John Deere, yes. Nothing runs like a deer. Option 3, you could work for the federal government at the Rock Island Arsenal, which is what my father did for 30 years. And if you did anything outside of those 3 things, it was supporting one of those 3 jobs. So imagine my parents' surprise when I announced that my career choice was to be a filmmaker. It was a little outside their experience and way outside of anything that they could possibly get their heads around. But to their credit, they supported me. And they said, if that's what you want to do, then that's what we will let you do, and you can go to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana to study film. Right. University of Illinois, by the way, is a college in the middle of a cornfield. And they don't have a film program. So while I started there, after a short period of time, I realized I need to go somewhere else. And I moved to Chicago. And I started to finish my degree at Columbia College in downtown Chicago, Illinois. Anybody? Chicago? All right. But the deal was I had to pay my own tuition, and I had to pay all of my bills. So I had to get a job. And what is the perfect job for an aspiring filmmaker? A video store. Not for nothing, the title of my story is Love in the Time of VHS. Or, when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with someone, you want the rest of your life to start right away. And my job in Chicago was at a video store called Park Video. And I felt lucky to get the job, and after about 4 weeks of working there, I met a new customer who had just come in and lived about 3 blocks from our store. And she had long, black, curly hair, green eyes that could set you on fire, and a long red winter coat that meant I could see her coming from a mile away. And I think the word is smitten. I was smitten. Now, despite the person that you see in front of you tonight, I was not a player. I was not someone... I wasn't smooth. So it took me months to work up the nerve to say even the most basic thing, $250 please, for a video rental. And for those who are younger than, say, 30 in the room tonight, there was a time before Blockbuster, before Netflix, when you had to go to a store and rent a VHS tape, a movie, take it home, watch it, rewind it, return it on time, or you'd be charged exorbitant fees. That's where I worked. All right, let's hear it for VHS. Did I hear beta? Beta? All right, let's hear it for beta. Okay. So in this prehistoric moment, this customer, who I was smitten with, would come in and I would find myself unable to speak, sweating, shaking. I had to hide in the back room every time she came in because I got to admit, she was way out of my league and I was blown away by her intellect. And by intellect, I meant she spent a lot of time in the foreign film section, which is a portion of the video store I never went to unless I had to reshelf a movie. So clearly she was smart, and she was pretty, and she had very distinguishing taste. Way out of my league. So, the holidays came around, the owner of the store said, hey, Park Video employees, pick your 2 or 3 favorite customers and give them 5 free rentals. I had 1 favorite customer. She didn't know she was my favorite customer, but she was my favorite customer. And over the number of months that I had been working there, I learned her name. Her name was Kathy Torres. Didn't know if she spoke English. Didn't know where she was from. Knew she lived a few blocks away. But because of my terrible fear and phobia of speaking to a pretty girl, knew nothing else about her. But she was my customer. And she got a gift of 5 free rentals from me, valued at $10. Which, by the way, I choked. I couldn't give it to her myself, so I asked my coworker to give her the card for me. But I did sign the card, your Park Video employee, Bill. So she knew it was from me. And there was a moment, a couple of months after that, where she came into the store and she rented a video and she stopped by the front desk. And I was all alone, so I had to wait on her. I had no choice. I couldn't hide. And I was being as eloquent as I could. $250, please. No, you don't have any late fees. And by the way, Kathy Torres never had a late fee in that video store, ever. Also, by the way, she never returned anything on time. So it was a little weird. But there was a moment when I had to look her in the eye, and I can't find the words to explain the electricity that passed between those green eyes and these dull, hazel, introverted, terrified eyes. But it was electric. And I hatched a plan at that moment. I was going to ask her out. It wasn't a great plan. It wasn't even a plan. It was I'm going to do this. I'll figure out the plan later. But months passed. I was waiting for the right moment. And the right moment arrived when there was no one else in the store, and Kathy Torres came in, unsuspecting that this was the night. This was the night that I was going to work up the courage to ask her to go out with me. Because here's the thing, when there's no one in the store, if she says yes, you can make up anything you want. If she says no, you can make up anything you want. It was a win-win for me. So she checked out her movies, and I screwed up my courage, and I said, so, would you like to go to dinner and a movie sometime with me? And she said, no, thank you, good night. And she left. But it was fine. There was no one in the store. There were no witnesses. No witnesses. I was crushed and deflated, but that was all right. I had taken my shot. Who here has taken their shot? You know the saying, you may not make every shot you take, but you miss 100% of every shot you don't take. I took my shot. Yeah, I failed. But still, it was my shot. And I got over it quickly. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. And I picked up the phone in the store, and it was her. And she said, you know, I left quickly. I feel like I need to explain. The thing is, I'm in a relationship. It's not a good relationship. In fact, the relationship is ending. But I don't think it'd be appropriate at all for me to go out with somebody if I'm still in a relationship. Right? And there was a pause, and she said, but I feel the same way about you. Click. Other than $250, please, we had never exchanged a single word. Nothing. And the overwhelming joy from that moment carried me through the next 4 months where she didn't come into the store. And I thought, well, I blew it, but there was that lovely postscript. But time marches on, and while I could have died happy, that's not the end of the story. 4 months passed, and out of the blue, Kathy Torres walked into the store and made a beeline for me, asked me to step outside, and said, listen, I ended the relationship. My life has moved on. I'm in a great place. This is my phone number. I would completely understand if you don't want to go out. But if you're interested, give me a call. And she left. Before her car was out of the parking lot, I was on with her answering machine saying, I'm watching you leave right now. I would like to go out. Which, as I say it out loud, sounds a lot creepier than it was at the time. And on May 4th, 1990, I had my first date with Kathy Torres. Now, I planned that date for 2 months. It was going to be a great Italian evening. She loved Italian films, so I was going to make it the night in Italy. Now, Chicago has great Italian food, and I asked every single person that I knew, where should we go? And they said Florence, which is a wonderful little bistro on the west side of Chicago in Little Italy. And I planned to take her to Florence. We were going to go see Cinema Paradiso, which was in the Art Theater down on Michigan Avenue. But we got to the restaurant, and we talked for so long that we missed the movie. Completely missed the movie. We drove down to Michigan Avenue and walked the avenue and spent the whole night talking. And as we were driving home, I looked over at her, and she leaned her head back, and she closed her eyes, and she said, "This is comfortable." I got her home. I shook her hand at the door. And drove home. And the sense of overwhelming joy that I felt from that evening, if I had died right then, I would have been happy. But again, time marches on. I got home, I put on my favorite John Barry album, the soundtrack to Somewhere in Time, and I drifted off to sleep. I'm a nerd, and that's how I go to sleep. But the next morning, I jumped out of bed and I called my dad, who is in the audience tonight. And I said to him, I went out with a woman I'm going to marry. And my dad said, well, that's amazing. Do what you have to do, but I can't, just don't expect me to pay for your dates. Video stores don't pay that well. But that May 4th, 1990 was day one for the love story of my life. And when I was talking to my dad, I reflected back on that moment the night before when she leaned her head back. And by the way, I drove a powder blue 1984 Ford Escort station wagon. Oh, a lot of Ford Escort station wagon fans. Amazing American-built cars. But I was thinking about the night before, and when she leaned her head back and she closed her eyes, and she said she felt comfortable. Do you still feel comfortable? Can you stand up? Ladies and gentlemen, Kathy Torres Klavon, my best friend, the love of my life, always and forever. So there's a postscript to this story, a quick postscript, I promise, because it's late and there's lots of beer still to consume. 20 years, almost to the day, after our first date. And by the way, May 4th for a nerd is an amazing day, right? And and our date was before that, was a big thing. But 20 years, almost to the day. Roger Ebert, the late film critic, who was a very prolific tweeter on Twitter, sent out a note, and he'd gotten a lovely painting, a watercolor painting from a fan. And he posted a picture of this lovely painting, and it was an evening scene with a movie theater marquee that said Cinema Paradiso. Showtime, 7 and 9:15. And a wet street and sidewalk, and in the distance was Roger Ebert and his wife, Chaz. And if you kind of squinted, he and his wife looked a little bit like what Kathy and I might have looked like that night. And he'd posted the name of the artist. So I looked her up, I found her email address, and I sent her a long note telling our story and saying I would love to buy a print of that painting. She responded immediately, and she said, that's a lovely story. And unfortunately, I gave the only print that I had to Roger. I gave him the original. I didn't make any other prints. I did take some high-res photographs. And under normal circumstances, I would give you one. But your wife already called me. Thank you.